Hey y'all, Fred here. Thanks so much for joining me today. We're going to do some cut testing on the old XM-18 Replica here. I just did a recent review of this. This is a fairly new knife I have added to the collection. I'll put a link to that review up here in the corner if you want to go back and watch the full review. I have really come to enjoy this knife, and I find myself picking it up and carrying it a lot more than I thought I would. You know, originally I just wanted to have a good representative example in my collection, which is why, you know, I didn't want to spend the $400-600+ to buy the real thing. I thought, well, I'll just get a replica and that will be it for my wax museum. I'll have a representative example of the XM-18. As you can see, I have done quite a bit of modding to this thing. We'll talk about that in a second. But, you know, what I was saying is I find myself picking this up quite a bit and just fidgeting with it. The action on it, as you can tell, is drop shut smooth. Easy to deploy, perfect detent actually, which is what makes this thing so enjoyable. The detent is excellent on this, so you can do reverse flips just fine, but it takes a strong flip to get it. Thumb flip is perfectly dialed in, and the flipper is perfectly dialed in. So getting all of those dialed in perfectly on a replica knife is not an easy thing to do. This is a great heavy-duty workhorse of a knife with good action. I had a little fun customizing this. As you can see, it doesn't come with all these colored screws and tabs and buttons and pocket clip and all that, but I will tell you, I'll have to warn you, none of these parts that you see, none of the blue parts on this knife actually fit when I first got them. Now the parts themselves fit. The holes and the screws are totally different sizes. So even with the thumb stud screws, I had to take a Dremel and shorten the length of the screw. Obviously one of these is the male, one's the female, the screw side on the male side. I had to shorten, I had to grind down the tip of that screw to shorten it so they would fit in here. I had to do the same thing with every one of these, I guess back spacers you'd call them. All of these screws were like 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters just too long, and when I screwed them in tight, these would roll around. They were just loose, like roller bearings almost in here, and that was because the screws needed to be a little bit shorter. They were bottoming out in the back of these and still didn't have a tight grip on the back of the scale. So I had to do the same thing, take the Dremel and shorten the ends of those screws without destroying the threads. There's a fun trick. On the pocket clip, the holes, so first and foremost, the screws that come with the pocket clip and the insert here and the over travel stop, those screws are totally different size. You know, it's like standard versus metric type screws. So the screws that came with it were too thin. They did not fit at all. They would not screw into the knife. So I had to stick with the original screws, which is why these are all silver stainless instead of blue, which is what comes with the hardware. But then the next problem was the holes for the pocket clip and the over travel and the filler insert tab were too tiny for the regular screws to fit into. So I then had to take a Dremel with a drill bit and ream out the holes for both of the pocket clip holes, the hole inside the over travel and the hole in the pocket clip filler. I had to ream those out larger so that the original screws would then fit in through the holes to be able to screw using the original screws. That's a lot of work, y'all, for modding a knife. I'm very happy with the way it turned out. You know, to me, this was just a fun little project knife. I thought, you know, I'll do some fun stuff with it. Why not? We'll have a little fun. I like the blue and the silver. I thought that was good. And then finally, I did also get a pivot screw set for this knife. And also, it was the same kind of blue anodized like the rest of this. However, the barrel part of the pivot is too wide for the hole. The hole here in this grip is too small for the blue barrel pivot that goes inside there, and I didn't have any way to like try to turn that barrel pivot to evenly shave it down around the outside. So that was a non-starter from the beginning. And of course then the screws are totally different sizes, so I couldn't even use like the blue screw with the existing barrel pivot in there. So that's all I could do. This is as far as I could get with it and as far as I wanted to get with it. I thought I would share that just in case any of you guys are wondering. This scale alone, you buy this real scale, this came on this knife. I bought it this way. And I can't remember, I paid about $60 for this thing as is. This titanium, these are real titanium solid slab scales. There's no lightning holes, so it's very solid all the way through. But this one, this is one of the most grippiest scales. It has this hologram effect. Let me zoom in a little bit. Just the way it's carved out, it has a weird hologram effect to it. But I'll tell you, this is one of the grippiest materials I think I've ever felt. This is phenomenally grippy. The real version of these scales for the real XM-18, $200 just for this one side of this one scale, $200. You can see those, you can get them on DLT, I think, right now. I just saw some recently, although they are hard to get. They don't make, apparently, too many of them from the factory. Anyhow, it's been a fun little knife. I've really enjoyed it. I find myself picking it up and carrying it more and more. But let's talk about the Redneck Sharpness rating scales here, because that's what we've come to see. We're going to do some cut testing on this thing. Goes anywhere from a 1, which is cuts like a spoon, all the way up to a 10, which is sharp enough to trim the corners off a shadow, right? So this is the incredibly scientific paper cutting tests, where we cut some paper after each of the tests, and I get to rate it on where I think it is. I will tell you, I have reprofiled this edge down to a very nice 18 degree. You can look at the height of the bevel on that. I just did another review also with this this Rosy XL. This is also at an 18 degree, and look at the difference in the bevel heights on the edges of both of these knives. It's incredible to see the difference of these side by side. Both of these are cut to an 18 degrees. What that means is that this is a very thick blade. This is 150 thousandths on the blade stock, which normally isn't like crazy, unruly large. Believe it or not, this is what Hinderer calls their slicer grind. These are normally 165 thousandths on the XM-18s. This is the slicer version at 150, but it's still only a partial flat grind. And so that means it only gets, you know, so thin here behind the edge, not too much. So I decided I'm going to go ahead and reprofile this thing before I do the cut testing on it. Typically, it was a pretty high angle grind. I think it was a 24 plus. I didn't fully measure it, but I know it was more than a 24 degree when I started because of the difference. I could just feel the difference in that thing. However, that being said, as you just saw, the whole point of saying all that was to say it is now a 10 out of 10 on the Redneck Sharpness rating scale. Very slicey, cuts thin, clean, no issues, feels really good on the cut test. Ergonomically, this is a fantastic knife. I mean, this is one of the reasons this knife has endured and been so popular for 20 years. That curve just fits beautifully into the palm of your hand. The jimping is perfectly done, in my opinion. You've got these wide scales. It's deep enough and sharp enough. It's not going to cut you, but you are going to grip into that just about anywhere you can put your thumb. You've got an excellent choked back position where you'll be protected. Your hand's not going to slide forward. If you have to do like hard push cuts, think of trying to push into a rubber hose or something like that you're trying to access, you can feel very confident back here, yet you have this forward finger choil position where we will be slicing cardboard at all day long. That means you can also do, you know, this style of a pinch grip where if I can get those 3 fingers on a knife, now I'm doing my draw cuts. Because it does have a downward slanted drop point blade, comes at or below the center line of the knife, means it's not, you don't have to get your hand too high up in order to do some of those draw cuts, which we do quite often. Very comfortable in almost all positions for all of those reasons. Incredibly solid feeling in hand, better than most. The blade drops nice and clean on these bearings. These are just, you know, cheap Chinese open face. They are ceramic ball bearings, but I mean, right out of the box, this thing came just drop shut smooth, very nice. And that's why I love sitting and fidgeting with this thing. However, here's the downside to this. Being a replica, this is only a 9CR18 MOV steel, right? Not the worst steel in the world. Certainly there's worse out there. And I've done some tests recently with a 9CR. I think it was a 𝗕𝗂𝗽𝗍𝗂𝗧 was in a 9CR that killed the test. I mean, just shocked the pants off of me on how well that 9CR did. Beat the pants off of much better steels in all of our tests. So it has potential. However, that being said, because I sharpened it, I did discover this feels like a very soft version of 9CR. I don't, they say it's a 58, 59. Maybe it is. Maybe it's a 58. I'd be surprised. It was one of those where the burr bends from side to side as you're going along and you're sharpening it. It just kind of bends that burr over, even to the end of sharpening, where I'm having to strop it forever to finally, you ever take a wire and you have to bend it back and forth and back and forth and back and forth till it finally pops off? Well, that's what you have to do with a very soft steel. That's what I had to do when I was stropping sharpening this knife to finally get that final sharp edge on it. Now it did strop out finally, and we've got a great sharp edge on it. So we're starting at a 10 out of 10. We've got an 18-degree freshly sharpened knife, 9 CR. I think it might be a little soft. We're going to see how it does in the cut test. Let's get over there and start cutting.
All right, we're going to start off with the cardboard as usual. Going to use the saber grip. Got 443 square inches, which is actually a little bit more. I usually try to get it around 400 inches, so maybe 10% more than usual. I think this big beefy knife can handle it. Although it's a much thicker blade, you do feel it a little bit. This first board I'm just going at regular speed, so you can see it does handle the cardboard without any issues. It was a 10 out of 10 sharpness. It's just the thickness of the blade overall at 150 thousandths, which is, again, their slicer grind version. I'd be interested to test out 165 thousandths and see how that does. Overall, it cuts great. I did notice it. You know, I just got done testing, if you recall, the 𝗕𝗂𝗽𝗍𝗃 XL, which has got to be the thinnest, sliciest knife I've ever owned. And then the 𝗥𝗏𝗽𝗍𝗃𝗍, which also did a really good job slicing through the cardboard. So this is handling it, no problem at all. No issues there. It's tearing it up. The real question is just going to be, how well does this 9 CR steel hold? Like I said, it feels a little bit softer on the soft side. So we're just going to have to see how well it hangs when we get done with all of our cutting here. Okay, so here's the moment of truth. Our typical knife drops about 3 points on the sharpness scale after the cardboard, I have noticed. So this first cut feels pretty good, but then the second cut, I notice I'm feeling something, although you can see it's relatively cleanly passing until right there. So that's what I'm feeling. There's something right in the middle of that blade, just a nick, and it's one of those that if you just go fast enough, you can cut right through it. However, you know, that does knock it down. If it was a good snag, it would be a 7 if it really held you up. But if you can kind of cut right through it, I rate that an 8 on the scale. I do try to be a little objective with it. So let's see how the hose does here. You can see it's pushing down, almost crushing the hose. This is a pretty thick nylon reinforced hose. However, I don't have to do a lot of sawing, a lot of back and forth cutting. So all things considered, I would be perfectly happy to have this knife as, you know, my work tool if I needed to cut some thick rubber hosing for anything. No problems at all. I give this you know, a 10 out of 10 in terms of, maybe a 9 out of 10 in terms of its ability to cut through that hose cleanly and easily, not have to saw it back and forth. I've had to do that with other knives, but now the moment of truth is to do any additional damage to the edge of the knife. That's that same snag right in the middle of the blade. I'm not feeling anything new here. Just going to kind of keep going slowly. And I don't feel much. I can definitely feel that hang up, but I'm trying to feel the hang up. So am I magnifying the problem for myself? I don't know. But you can see it's right there, but then you back that knife up and just push right through it. It will slice through it. So we're going to give this a 7.5. I'm going to take a half a point off of the last one. The sisal rope is always an edge killer. This will give us a good sense of its ability. And what I'm looking for is, will it pop through the rope without having to saw it back and forth, right? Just that rope pop is what I call it. And as you can see here, it is actually popping through the rope very nicely. That little bit of belly in the front edge of the tip just pops through it with no effort whatsoever. So I'm giving that a 10 out of 10 in terms of the sisal rope, which is pretty tough to cut. So you can see it's all cutting good here. It's basically the same as it was before. I'm going to do some testing and try to really get towards the tip of the knife here to see, because that's really where you're focused. The cutting on this rope in particular is out there at the towards the tip where the belly is. I don't feel a whole lot more in terms of damage, so I'm going to put this one now at a 7, and we'll keep on moving on and see. So the wood cutting is going to be interesting. I've got a couple different grips. I always like to start in the saber grip, and that's where this knife really feels comfortable. And what I'm finding right off the get-go here, for some reason, this knife wants to bite into the wood more so than most knives that I test. And I don't know what that is. The geometry of the knife, or what it is, but it's cutting nice and deep into that wood. I am feeling this aftermarket pocket clip. If I would have kept I think the original one, it's much flatter. I probably wouldn't have had that hot spot. So now I'm going into the hammer grip to see how does that feel. This is where I usually feel the top edge of the knife right there in my hand. So I do feel it in the hammer grip. I do not feel it in the saber grip. It's very, very comfortable. Ergonomically, this thing is a rock star. And I think that's, what most people love about this knife is it's really well designed from an ergonomic standpoint. Now, the question is, and the edge retention, and this is the weird thing, almost always after I do my cutting on the wood, it almost feels like it gets sharper. I don't know. I'm going to leave it at a 7. We're going to call it there. I think that's fair. There's a pretty good snag in the middle of the blade. Let's drop it back up and see if we can get it back to a 10. Again, being a somewhat softer steel, although this knife has held as well as probably 80% of the knives I've tested. Like I said at the very beginning of the cutting test here, our average knife drops from a 10 to a 7. That's a pretty normal drop across this test. And so I was expecting far worse from this knife. It just felt really soft when I was sharpening it. So we'll see. Being that it is a sharper steel, it should drop back nicely, and it's feeling pretty good here. So let's grab a piece of paper and confirm. Did we get it back to a 10? And that's nice and clean. That's just nice and cleanly ripping right through. That snag is gone. You can see we're cutting right past it. Slowly, quickly, doesn't matter. Back to a 10. Feeling really good about that. So it drops back nicely. So overall, I'm pretty impressed with this thing. Let's pull up the numbers. We'll go through these real quick and let you know my final assessment here. All right, so I know this is hard to read if you're on a small screen, so I'm going to just read through the numbers real quick, give you my final opinion on all things. This is the Hinderer XM-18 3.5 inch. It is a replica knife. I paid $46.75 for this one. I think that was a pretty good value for me. It's a 9CR18 MOV steel. Have no idea what the HRC rating is on this knife. It was really just one that I wanted to have kind of like for my wax museum, what I call my collection. I don't really use. I just wanted to have a representative example. But it held up pretty good. So if 9CR18 was really well done, like perfectly done, it should be about a 4.5 on the Knife Steel Nerds edge retention score. I did sharpen this knife first down to an 18 degree. That always helps knives out in the test every time, and I think it did here again as well. We started out at a 10 on the sharpness scale. Cut 443 square inches. That took us down to about an 8 on the sharpness scale. That is right on average with most knives that I test. Did our 3 rubber hose cuts. Maybe took it down a half a point there to a 7.5. Did 11 rope cuts. Took it down not much more really to a 7, and those are pretty right all in the same range there. There was no real noticeable decline. Did the normal wood cut, which is more about ergonomics than it is about the edge retention, but I always test the edge afterwards. That had no impact on the edge, so still at a 7. So we went from a 10 to a 7 overall across the entire test today. That's pretty normal. That's what an average knife does, whether it's D2, 14, my 14C knives I have yet to have a 14C knife anywhere close to that. But my 9CRs typically do go from a 10 to a 7, 10 to a 7. I've got my my 𝗕𝗂𝗀𝗃𝗃 went from a 10 to a 7. That's a 154 cm. You would think that would do pretty well. So that's what we did here today. I did strop it back about 21 strokes per side. Got us back to a 10 out of 10. So overall, this knife clearly did better than I was expecting it to do. I know it always comes down to, did I sharpen the knife first? When I don't, they always seem to do really poorly on the test, and when I do, they seem to do really good on the test. There's been no exceptions to that rule yet with, I don't know how many, 20, 30 knives we've tested so far. It held up really well for a 9CR, you know, kind of no-name, just a cheap Chinese knife. The ergonomics were fantastic. That's what the XM-18 is all about. You know, if not a little maybe on the heavy side. That aftermarket pocket clip did give me some hot spots. You know, I put it on there because it looks cool, but it's definitely not the most ergonomic. The original pocket clip that came with the knife is much flatter and probably would not have given me those hot spots. In terms of cutting, it cut through the hose really well, cut through the cardboard really well. You do feel a little bit of the blade thickness, like certainly after you do a cut test with the Rosy and then you go to something like an XM-18, you're going to feel a little bit of difference. That being said, it tore through that cardboard at every angle with no issues whatsoever. The hose cuts, it pushed through pretty cleanly on those. Excellent job on the rope. That sisal rope, it popped every single time. That belly, just rock that belly into it, pops that rope in half. That's a tough rope to cut, y'all. You should try it sometime. So really good about all the cutting that it did. It felt great all the way through. That saber grip when you're in the wood, and it had fantastic wood bite too. Unusually good wood bite. Maybe it was me. It's hard to tell with these things, but it was noticeable, a noticeable difference. So just pointing out all the highlights. This is, to me, a great EDC knife if you don't mind the weight. You know, it's clearly on the heavier side as far as pocket knives go. So if you don't mind that weight, or if you need to go out and have a hard use day where you're going to be cutting some heavy duty stuff like hoses, straps and ropes and so forth, this is probably not a bad one to take. Now, obviously, the real one with a good high-quality steel would be phenomenal. But for $45, $46, it's hard to complain at the performance that this just delivered here, right? It's a value proposition for me. Originally, I said, well, I just want this in my collection. Now, after this test, I'm thinking, no, I'm actually going to carry and use this knife and really get some use out of it. So I'm very pleasantly surprised in how well it did in that regard, right? All right, overall rating, I gave the edge retention a 7 because it was just a little above average. You know, I've had certainly a lot of knives do worse, but I've also had a lot of knives do better. As far as EDC, that's a trickier one. I think it's an 8. I really enjoy using it. It's very fidget-friendly, drop shut, smooth action on it. Now that it's sharpened to an 18 degree, it's very slicey. Even for 150 thousandths thick blade stock. But if you don't mind carrying a little bit of a heavier knife, you're certainly not going to do it in shorts during the summertime, you know, but with a good pair of jeans or work pants, man, all day long, I'm all about that. I will definitely carry this out to some jobs that I might go do, even just working with friends or family around the house. I'm gonna use this a little bit more now than I thought I was originally. So there you go. Hopefully that all makes sense to you guys. Let me know what you think down in the comments. I always value hearing feedback from you on these tests. What could I do better? What would you like to see more or less of? If you're not already subscribed, I would love to have you join our little band of renegades out here in the dark interwebs of the corner of the knife world that not many people venture into. Everyone is welcome here at all times. So thanks so much. I appreciate y'all. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. I look forward to chatting with you. Otherwise, y'all have a great day. See ya.